It's almost a decade since property mogul Sisa Ngebulana founded Rebosis, brick by brick. Born in the dusty streets of Mthatha in the Eastern Cape, Sisa would become the first black man to make history in South Africa's property sector. In 2011, he listed the black-owned and managed company on Africa's largest stock exchange, with 23 billion rand worth of assets. He went on to achieve success building shopping malls and offices in South Africa and even the UK. For years, Rebosis kept investors smiling, paying handsome dividends. But Brexit and a slowing South African economy have brought the good times to an abrupt end. Its share price has been decimated to record lows, leaving some investors wondering whether the company has hit a brick wall. But this is where and how the story of Rebosis all began.
My grandmother, who was very strong educationist, if you want to call it that. She was a teacher background, and she strongly believed in education and that sort of thing. So my grandfather, on the other hand, was the entrepreneur, came from a background of hustling. So growing up, the culture was that of, from an entrepreneurial perspective, but she wanted her whole family to be educated and to be professionals. And so I used to drive for her many times, and we used to have very healthy debates in the car and arguments sometimes. And she said, well, I think you'll make a good lawyer, and I think you should be a lawyer. And I didn't really have much of a choice. Back in time, I think you took the choices that your folks made easier. It's not like today where people are more liberal and have their own views about what they want to do.
You never practiced as a lawyer?
I did practice for about a year. So I did my articles with the second largest law firm in Cape Town, Janus de Villiers, and did my articles with them, qualified, got admitted as an attorney for High Court, and I practiced for a year before I left.
What made you leave? At what point did you realize that this is not for me?
It wasn't necessarily the reward I was looking for in life. And I thought I came from a more entrepreneurial background, and I needed to still go out and see the corporate world. So I left for the corporate world to be legal counsel to Eskom for about 7 years before I then started my own things.
It's quite interesting because I've read a few reviews about some of the lessons that you have drawn from working for the public sector. Perhaps you can just elaborate on how working for the public sector has helped you be a better business person in the private sector.
Look, I think for me, Eskom back in time was the first corporate. It was really run like a proper corporate at the time, and I think it enabled a lot of, especially black folk, who ordinarily would have never had opportunities in the corporate world back in time, because those years, it was just, after the first elections, and affirmative action hadn't even come to place yet, and so it was quite an enabling background for a lot of black folk in terms of exposure, and I suppose to all of us, like anything else, once you get to an environment, it's up to you to gain from it as much as you can.
You had a side hustle while
Yes.
you were working at Eskom. Tell us about that.
In my junior degree, I had student loans from second and third year. So when I went to Natal and Maritzburg, Standard Bank wanted me to pay my loans back. And they offered me a job. Naturally, I would have paid through my job, but I wasn't keen to actually be employed yet because I wanted to complete my profession through 2 articles. So I had the pressure because I had summons, while I was at Natal, and I thought, geez, how do I resolve this? So I then registered for the agency board exam, and I worked for Reality L1, and I used to sit at homes and sell homes on Sundays. And by the following year of the year that I started selling homes, I had sold 16 homes and became the best agent.
And in terms of hard times, some are very much aware of the hard times that Rebosis, the company that you founded, is currently going through right now. What would you say has been the most difficult period of being in the business?
I've had lots of different hard times, and I've had my peaks. So if I look at the current challenges that Rebosis is experiencing, It's external factors that have come through at Rebosis, which, I look back, if anything different could have been done, I don't think, given the circumstances of the time, anything different would have been done. Quite frankly, I think if it had to repeat itself, perhaps the same decisions would have been made. So in the main, what's happening, for instance, with Rebosis, we made big investments in the UK, three big shopping centres in the UK. Now, every UK shopping centre owner is in trouble currently because of Brexit. There's about 120, the latest stats, 121 shopping centres being handed back to the banks in the UK by US funds. A lot of listed companies in the UK they own the largest shopping centres in the UK. They're trading at 90% below net asset value. Their share prices have been decimated. So there's a context to it. Coupled with, in South Africa, the listed property market, it's the worst cycle it's ever gone through.
Quite many a times, it's very difficult for founders to let go of
Yes.
their companies. It's their baby.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering how also it is for you to come back as the sort of messiah for Rebosis, if you allow me to paint that image, and not have improved the crisis as per se, because things look a lot worse for Rebosis upon your return.
What happened is, I stepped back quite reluctantly, but I had to step back. I think it would have been harder to find somebody given the crisis that was there at the time. But unfortunately, soon thereafter, the UK shopping centre consequence of devaluation of the shopping centres in the UK followed. Hardly 5 months after I came back at the helm. In fact, it was November last year, where all the UK shopping centre yields moved up and the valuations dropped. So we lost about 65% of our net equity in the UK in November last year. And it meant that you can't get dividends at the time from the UK, which made up almost a third of our dividends. And we had to write down, which we did now in May this year, on our balance sheet, because it was post-year-end event, so we could only do the following 6 months. We had to write down the entire investment out of the UK, so we impaired it completely. And that's really what's decimated the price.
What would your words of advice be to aspiring entrepreneurs wanting to be successful in the property space?
I mentor quite a lot of people. I think for me, I always say to people, step by step. I think it's one thing to see people who are out there and think that you also want multi-billion deals or multi-million deals. I think going through the process and learning through the strides. For me, I mentioned that I've always learned through challenges. I had quite a big loan with a trucking venture that didn't go well back when I worked for Eskom, and I bought a plot. I built the first house, and from there, second house, I lost money, but carried on. I ended up the entire street, and there was a break point where I was lucky when Crystals in '98 hiked up rates from 12% to 26%, where all the developers in the same street I was developing in, literally were on the verge of bankruptcy, and I just sold 2 properties on that same street, and I had cash, and I was able to buy 6 of their projects, and I completed them with cash and made good money out of it. So, I think brick by brick, that's always been my philosophy in life. I think you learn from one thing to the next.
When as an entrepreneur do you know, or should you accept that it is time to give up? Because giving up is not something that is common in an entrepreneurial story, but do you believe that there is a time where it is merited?
Giving up is never an option for entrepreneurs. When businesses didn't succeed, I didn't look at that as a giving up. I just thought it's just another curveball, and I need to just turn and look somewhere else and forget about that chapter. But the struggle carried on in terms of building the business, in just a different direction. And perhaps it's just a message that perhaps we must just change direction and look at a different model in building a business. I think, on the other hand, look, I've always said to people, don't venture into something where you haven't seen other people successful in. There's lots of businesses out there where they're very uniquely tailored, and the models just don't work, and nobody has ever made them work. You'd rather try something that's been tried and tested before, but something also that doesn't have floods of people trying to do the same thing.
You spoke about mentoring quite a few young people. How important was mentorship in your success? Who mentored you?
I've got people that I've always looked up to, but I've never had people, other than growing up as a young boy with my grandfather, I've never had people sitting next to me and, guiding me through tortuous waters of business and, trying new ventures, unfortunately. But, also I think what tends to happen is that if I tended to be the first with many things. If you're the first with many things, you tend to not actually have mentors in what you're trying to do. And you'd find that you'll have far more failures or far more challenges than the usual. But it's got its own benefits.
And finally, Sisa, many people are not aware of just how healthy you are, incredibly healthy you are. And I'd just like to know, number one, why and how important do you think a healthy body is to a healthy business?
I think for me, that's number one priority. I have a very strict diet. I've got a very strict training program. I think a healthy body gives rise to a healthy mind, and a healthy mind is capable of doing amazing things. Is capable of resolving the most complicated situations and challenges in life. And I think a healthy mind is more rooted in spirit, better. And yes, I think I would encourage anybody to stay as healthy as they can. I've seen very good talent being wasted because of bad eating methods, bad health, and that sort of thing. I've lost friends through heart attacks at a young age, but just people not looking after their health, unfortunately. It's just one of those things. And for me, I think the health conscience came back when I had the challenges, I would say maybe 2010. Those years where, I had Hemingway's and I was about to list. I went through a divorce, and, I then fell into blood pressure, cholesterol, and I tried through, and I was borderline sugar, but I pulled myself back through good eating habits from there, and I never looked back.